The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the sound of 100 different species talking at once. Representatives from across known space had gathered on the neutral station of Nexus Prime, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, growls, and electronic beeps. The massive dome overhead showed the swirling colors of the nebula beyond, casting strange shadows across the curved walls. At the center of it all sat the human delegation. 3 figures in simple gray uniforms that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other species. The Zephyrians wore flowing robes that seemed to move like liquid metal. The Korthak representatives were encased in crystalline armor that refracted light into brilliant patterns. Even the insectoid hive lords displayed intricate biomechanical decorations that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. But the humans just sat there in their plain clothes, looking ordinary. Commander Vex of the Altarian High Command stood at the central podium, his blue-scaled skin gleaming under the chamber lights. His serpentine eyes swept across the assembled delegates before settling on the human trio. We are here today to discuss the upcoming siege of Kepler, 442b. His voice carried easily through the chamber's translation systems. The rebel forces have fortified themselves on this world, and our combined fleets will need to work together to break their defenses. A low rumble of agreement came from the various delegations. The rebellion had been causing problems for months now, striking at trade routes and military installations across 3 sectors. Kepler, 442b, was their main stronghold, a mountainous world with natural fortress formations that would make any assault extremely difficult. The Zephyrian fleet will provide our main bombardment, Commander Vex continued. Their plasma cannons can crack mountain faces from orbit. The Korthak ground forces will establish beachheads in the valleys. The Hive Lords will coordinate our logistics and supply lines. He paused, his gaze shifting to the humans again. There was something almost dismissive in his expression. And our newest allies will provide whatever support they can manage. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through parts of the chamber. The humans had only joined the Galactic Council 6 months ago, after their small fleet had helped defend a Zephyrian colony from raiders. It was their first major military operation, and many of the older species weren't entirely sure what to expect from these newcomers. The leader of the human delegation, Admiral Sarah Chun, stood up slowly. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. When she spoke, her voice was steady and measured. "Thank you, Commander Vex. We're honored to be part of this operation." She gestured to the 2 figures beside her. "This is Colonel Martinez, our ground forces coordinator, and Sergeant First Class Jackson Roberts, one of our special operations specialists." The man she indicated as Roberts didn't look like much. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 40s, with weathered skin and quiet eyes. His hair was starting to show streaks of gray at the temples. Unlike the other 2 humans who wore dress uniforms with various medals and insignia, Roberts wore a simple field uniform with very few decorations. Just a small patch showing crossed rifles and a few service ribbons that most of the aliens wouldn't recognize anyway. Commander Vex's forked tongue flicked out briefly, a sign of mild irritation among his species. "Yes, well, I'm sure your people will do their best. However, I should point out that this operation will require precision and experience. The rebel fortifications include long-range defensive positions that have been giving our forces trouble for weeks." One of the Korthak representatives, General Thonk, leaned forward in his crystal armor. His voice came out as a series of harmonic tones that the translators converted to words. "Our advanced scouts report that the rebels have positioned snipers in the high peaks around their main base. These positions can cover the entire approach route. Our warriors are brave, but even they cannot charge across open ground under precise enemy fire. The Zephyrian orbital strikes have been unable to eliminate these positions," added the elegant voice of High Priestess Nalaya, the Zephyrian delegation leader. "The rocky formations provide too much cover, and our targeting systems cannot achieve the necessary precision at such long range." Admiral Chin nodded thoughtfully. "Long-range precision shooting is certainly a challenge. What kind of distances are we talking about?" General Thong consulted a holographic display that materialized in front of him. "The enemy positions are approximately 2 to 3 kilometers from the nearest approach routes. At those ranges, Even our best marksmen struggle to achieve consistent accuracy. A soft chuckle came from the human delegation. It was so quiet that most of the aliens didn't notice it, but Sergeant Roberts had smiled slightly at something. Commander Vex noticed, though. His serpentine features twisted into what might have been a frown. Is something amusing about our tactical situation, Sergeant? Roberts looked up, seemingly surprised to be addressed directly. No, sir, not amusing. Just familiar. Familiar. The word came out as a hiss. Well, Roberts said, shifting slightly in his chair, 2 to 3 kilometers isn't really that far for long-range shooting. Back on Earth, that's considered a moderate distance for precision work. The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then, several species began talking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of disbelief and what sounded like laughter. 2 to 3 kilometers is moderate. General Thonk's harmonic voice rose in pitch. Sergeant, with respect, I think your translation system may be malfunctioning. At 2 kilometers, most projectile weapons lose significant accuracy due to atmospheric interference, gravity drop, and target movement. High Priestess Nalaya's melodious voice carried clearly over the others. Perhaps humans have different standards for accuracy than those of us who have been fighting wars among the stars for centuries. Commander Vex raised one scale hand, and the chamber quieted. Sergeant Roberts, what is the longest confirmed kill shot in human military history? Roberts was quiet for a moment, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Admiral Chun gave him a small nod of encouragement. Well, sir, he said finally, the official record belongs to a Canadian sniper, Craig Harrison. He made a kill shot at 2,475 meters using a .338 Lapua Magnum. That was back in 2009 in Afghanistan. The chamber erupted again, but this time the sounds were clearly dismissive. Several delegates were making gestures that didn't need translation to understand their meaning. 2,475 meters. General Thonk's voice was filled with what the translator identified as skepticism. Sergeant, that would require compensation for bullet drop, wind speed, humidity, temperature variations, target movement, and a dozen other factors. The computational requirements alone. Sir, we don't usually use computers for shooting, Roberts said quietly. Most of that stuff, you just learn to feel. This statement caused what could only be described as an uproar. The sophisticated species around the chamber simply couldn't believe what they were hearing. The Zephyrians were known for their precision targeting systems. The Korthak had range-finding equipment built into their armor. The Hive Lords could share targeting data instantaneously across their network minds. The idea that someone could make precision shots at extreme range without computer assistance was simply beyond their experience. Commander Vex Gales had shifted to a darker blue, indicating strong emotion. Sergeant, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a serious military operation. We cannot base our tactics on optimistic assessments of human capabilities. Admiral Chin stood up, her expression still calm. Commander, I understand your skepticism, but I assure you, Sergeant Robert qualifications are quite real. Perhaps we could arrange a demonstration. Demonstration? High Priestess Nalaya's voice carried a note of elegant disdain. Admiral, we are not here for entertainment. We have serious tactical considerations to address. I agree completely, Admiral Chin replied, which is why I think a practical demonstration would be valuable. If our sniper capabilities are as advertised, it could significantly change our approach to this operation. The chamber buzzed with discussion as the various species debated among themselves. Finally, Commander Vex held up his hand again. Very well, he said, his tone suggesting he was humoring them. We will arrange a demonstration on the station's firing range. However, I should warn you that our testing facilities are designed for weapons used by advanced spacefaring civilizations. The targets and distances may be somewhat beyond what your people are accustomed to. Roberts looked at Admiral Chun, who nodded. That's fine, sir. What would be convenient? Tomorrow morning, ship's time. I will have our technicians set up appropriate targets. Commander Vex's expression suggested he was already planning how to let the humans down gently when their demonstration failed. Now, shall we return to the real, tactical planning? As the meeting continued, most of the aliens focused on their orbital bombardment patterns and ground assault routes. They discussed the sophisticated equipment they would bring to bear, the coordinated timing of their attacks, and the complex logistics of moving multiple fleets into position. But a few of them occasionally glanced at the quiet human in the simple uniform, wondering what exactly they would see tomorrow morning. None of them really believed the humans could do what they claimed. After all, they had been fighting wars in space for thousands of years. Surely they understood the limitations of projectile weapons better than some newcomers from a primitive world at the edge of known space. Sergeant Roberts just sat quietly, listening to their plans and occasionally taking notes on an old-fashioned paper pad. He didn't say much else for the rest of the meeting, but when someone mentioned the rebel sniper positions again, that small smile returned to his face. The meeting ended with various delegations filing out, their conversations focused on fleet movements and assault timetables. The humans were among the last to leave, and as they walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime, Admiral Chun fell into step beside Roberts. "You know, they don't believe a word of it," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Roberts replied. "Can't really blame them. Must sound pretty crazy from their perspective." Colonel Martinez, walking on Roberts' other side, grinned. "Wait until they see you shoot, Sergeant. Think they'll change their tune." Roberts shrugged. "Doesn't much matter what they think, sir. If those rebel snipers are causing problems for the ground assault, we'll just have to deal with them." 2 to 3 kilometers, Admiral Chun mused. "That's practically point-blank range for you, isn't it?" "Well," Roberts said, "it's not exactly a challenge, but it should get the job done." As they walked back to the human quarters, none of them noticed the small group of alien delegates following at a distance, talking quietly among themselves. The demonstration tomorrow was going to be more interesting than anyone expected. The firing range on Nexus Prime was unlike anything most humans had ever seen. The facility stretched for nearly 5 kilometers through the station's outer ring, with holographic targets, energy barriers, and sophisticated measurement systems that could track projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The walls were lined with displays showing trajectory calculations, atmospheric simulations, and targeting solutions that updated in real time. When Admiral Chun, Colonel Martinez, and Sergeant Roberts arrived the next morning, they found the chamber already crowded with representatives from nearly every species on the station. Word had apparently spread about the demonstration, and what had started as a simple test had turned into something of an event. Commander Vex stood near the control station, his blue scales now a lighter shade that indicated amusement. Admiral Shen, I hope you slept well. We have prepared what I believe will be an adequate test of your claims." The targets were impressive. Energy constructs that could be programmed to mimic any desired shape, size, and movement pattern. Commander Vex gestured to the display showing the range configuration. "We have set up targets at 1, 2, 3, and for kilometer distances," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Each target is approximately the size of a standard humanoid torso. They are programmed with random movement patterns to simulate combat conditions." High Priestess Nalaya glided over to join them, her flowing robes seeming to move independently of any air current. "Additionally, we have activated atmospheric simulation throughout the range. Wind patterns, humidity variations, temperature gradients. All the factors that would affect projectile accuracy in a real environment." General Thonk approached from the weapons station, his crystal armor reflecting the range lights in brilliant patterns. "Sergeant Roberts, we have also prepared a selection of weapons for your use. Our military suppliers provided their most advanced projectile systems." He gestured to a display case containing sleek, high-tech rifles that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. Each one was equipped with targeting computers, environmental sensors, and stabilization systems. The smallest of them was nearly 2 meters long and looked like it could stop a small vehicle. Roberts looked at the weapons for a moment, then turned to Admiral Chun. "Ma'am, do I have permission to use my own equipment?" Commander Vex's head tilted in a way that suggested confusion. "Your own equipment? Sergeant, these weapons represent the finest projectile technology available to Council forces. Surely anything your people have developed would be considerably less sophisticated?" "Well, sir," Roberts said diplomatically, "I'm just more familiar with my own rifle. If that's acceptable." Admiral Chun nodded. "Colonel Martinez has her gear." Martinez stepped forward carrying a long case that looked distinctly ordinary compared to the high-tech weapons on display. When he opened it, several aliens leaned forward to get a better look, then stepped back in apparent confusion. The rifle inside was clearly human-made, and just as clearly not sophisticated by galactic standards. It was a bolt-action weapon with a traditional wooden stock, simple iron sights, and what appeared to be a manually operated mechanism. Compared to the sleek, computer-assisted weapons in the display case, it looked like something from a museum. "That's your precision shooting weapon?" General Thonk's harmonic voice carried clear notes of disbelief. "Yes, sir," Roberts replied, lifting the rifle from its case with practiced ease. "She's been with me for about 8 years now. Custom built back on Earth." He handled the weapon with obvious familiarity, checking the action and running his hand along the stock and barrel. Then he reached into the case and pulled out a small box of ammunition. High Priestess Nalaya examined the cartridges with obvious curiosity. These projectiles are quite primitive. No guidance systems, no propulsion assistance, no targeting enhancement. How do you compensate for environmental factors? Math, Roberts said simply, loading rounds into the rifle's magazine. And experience. The assembled aliens exchanged glances that needed no translation. Several of them were clearly beginning to think this demonstration was going to be embarrassing for everyone involved. Commander Vex cleared his throat. "Very well, Sergeant. The targets are active. You may begin whenever you're ready." Roberts nodded and walked to the firing line. The range stretched out before him, with the holographic targets visible as small shapes in the distance. At 1 kilometer, the target looked like a small dot. At 4 kilometers, it was barely visible even with the range's enhanced lighting. He lay down in a prone position, settling the rifle against his shoulder in a way that looked completely natural. Then he just lay there for several long moments, not moving, barely even seeming to breathe. "Is he experiencing some kind of technical difficulty?" whispered one of the Hive Lord representatives to another. "I believe he is," thinking, came the reply. After about 30 seconds, Roberts made a small adjustment to the rifle's position. Then another. He seemed to be feeling for something that none of the watching aliens could detect. Finally, he fired. The sound was surprisingly modest compared to the energy weapons the aliens were used to. Just a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. No impressive light show, no visible energy beam, no dramatic recoil. On the display showing the first target, a red mark appeared dead center. The chamber fell silent. "Target 1, center mass hit," announced the range's automated system in its neutral electronic voice. Commander Vex looked at the display, then at Roberts, then at the display again. "That was well done, Sergeant. Now the second target is at 2 kilometers. Roberts had already shifted his aim. This time he took a little longer, making more careful adjustments. The wind simulation was stronger at the longer range, and the atmospheric effects were more pronounced. Another crack. Another red mark, slightly off-center, but still well within the target zone. "Target 2, successful hit," the system announced. By now, the aliens weren't talking among themselves anymore. They were all staring at the human lying on the firing line with his primitive weapon. The third shot took nearly a full minute to set up. Roberts seemed to be calculating something in his head, making tiny adjustments to his position and aim. At 3 kilometers, the target was barely visible, and the environmental simulation was running complex wind patterns and atmospheric disturbances. When he fired, several aliens leaned forward to watch the display. The red mark appeared slightly low and to the left, but still well within the target area. "Target 3, successful hit," the system confirmed. General Thonk's crystal armor was now pulsing with colors that indicated extreme agitation. This should not be possible. At 3 kilometers, the projectile dropped alone. "About 12 feet, Roberts said conversationally, not moving from his firing position. "Give or take, depending on the exact atmospheric conditions. You calculated 12 feet of bullet drop in your head." High Priestess Nalaya's voice had lost its elegant composure. "Well, it's not really calculation," Roberts replied, settling in for the final shot. "More like you just know what it feels like." The fourth target was at the maximum range of the facility. For kilometers away, it was little more than a theoretical point in the distance. The environmental simulation was running at maximum complexity, with shifting wind patterns, temperature gradients, and humidity variations that would challenge even computer-assisted targeting systems. Roberts lay still for nearly 2 minutes. Occasionally, he would make microscopic adjustments to his position or aim, His breathing became so slow and controlled that several aliens began to wonder if he had fallen asleep. When the shot came, it seemed almost anticlimactic. The same sharp crack, the same modest recoil. This time, though, the display showed something that made several aliens gasp audibly. The red mark wasn't just within the target area. It was dead center, as perfect as if it had been placed there by a computer. Target 4, center mass hit, the system announced. The chamber erupted. Aliens who had been skeptical were now talking excitedly among themselves, their voices creating a symphony of amazement and disbelief. Others stood in stunned silence, staring at the display screens that showed 4 successful hits at ranges they had considered impossible for unassisted projectile weapons. Robert stood up, ejecting the spent cartridge and carefully cleaning his rifle barrel with a small rod from his kit. He seemed completely unaware of the commotion around him. Commander Vex approached, his scales now a deep purple that indicated profound confusion. Sergeant Roberts, I must ask, how is this possible? Our computer models indicate that unassisted targeting at these ranges should have an accuracy rate of less than 10%, even under ideal conditions. Well, sir, Roberts said, still focused on his weapon maintenance, I suppose it depends on what you mean by unassisted. You did not use any electronic targeting aids. No environmental sensors, no ballistic computers, no guidance systems. No, sir. But I wasn't really unassisted. This statement caused another stir among the watching aliens. General Thonk stepped forward, his armor chiming softly. What assistance did you use? Roberts looked up from his rifle, seeming genuinely puzzled by the question. Well, everything I learned in 22 years of military service. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, counter-sniper operations in Syria, peacekeeping missions in 3 different countries. Every shot I've taken, every mistake I've made, every environmental condition I've encountered. He gestured to his rifle. Plus everything this rifle has taught me. We've been together for 8 years. I know exactly how she shoots in any condition. I know her quirks, her preferences, her limitations. When I aim, I'm not just using my eyes and hands. I'm using 2 decades of experience and muscle memory. High Priestess Nalaya spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. You're saying that this accuracy comes from practice? Yes, ma'am. Practice and experience. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the skeptical quiet of aliens waiting for a human to fail. It was the thoughtful silence of experienced military officers beginning to understand something they hadn't expected. General Thonk was the first to speak. How many humans have this level of skill? Roberts shrugged. Hard to say exactly. In our military, we probably have a few thousand snipers with similar capabilities. Some better than me, some not quite as good. But any properly trained sniper should be able to handle the distances you're dealing with on Kepler 442b. A few thousand? Commander Vex's voice came out as barely more than a hiss. Yes, sir. Though for this operation, you probably only need 1 or 2. Depends on how many rebel snipers we're talking about. Admiral Chin stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. Gentlemen, I believe we should discuss how this capability might affect our tactical planning. As the various species began talking among themselves again, their conversations had a very different tone than before. The dismissive amusement was gone, replaced by genuine interest and more than a little concern. Because if the humans could do this with primitive projectile weapons and no computer assistance, what else might they be capable of that the galaxy hadn't expected? Roberts finished cleaning his rifle and carefully placed it back in its case. As he did, he noticed several aliens watching his every move, as if they were trying to understand some secret technique. But there was no secret, just practice, patience, and the kind of hard-earned skill that could only come from years of doing something over and over until it became as natural as breathing. Tomorrow, they would see what that skill could accomplish in actual combat. The assault on Kepler 442b began at dawn, ship's time. The combined fleets of the Galactic Council hung in orbit around the mountainous world like a collection of deadly jewels against the black of space. Zephyrian dreadnoughts, with their flowing energy weapons, Korthak battleships bristling with crystal-enhanced armor, and the organic-looking vessels of the Hive Lords that seemed to pulse with their own life. Among them, almost invisible in comparison, was the human frigate Determination. She was small angular, and looked primitive compared to the graceful curves and advanced materials of the alien ships. But today, she carried the most important cargo in the entire fleet. On the planet's surface, the rebel stronghold was a natural fortress carved into the side of a massive mountain. Ancient lava flows had created a series of step plateaus leading up to the main base, with each level providing perfect defensive positions. The rebels had been smart about their choice of location. Any ground assault would have to advance up those plateaus under constant fire from elevated positions. In the command center of the Altarian flagship Sovereign Justice, Commander Vex studied the tactical displays with growing frustration. The orbital bombardment had been going on for 3 hours, but the rebel positions remained largely intact. The mountain itself was protecting them, providing cover from all but the most precise strikes. "Report," he ordered. General Thonk's harmonic voice carried clear notes of annoyance. "Our ground forces have established beachheads in Valleys 7 and 12, but we cannot advance up the main approaches. Enemy sniper positions on peaks 4, 7, and 11 continue to provide overlapping fields of fire. Any movement in the open draws immediate and accurate response." On the tactical display, red markers showed where Korthak assault troops had been pinned down by sniper fire. The rebel marksmen were good, very good, and they had chosen their positions well. Each sniper nest covered multiple approach routes, and they were positioned far enough apart that eliminating one would not significantly help with the others. High Priestess Nalaya's voice floated across the command center like music. "The Zephyrian fleet has attempted precision strikes on the identified sniper positions. However, the target profiles are too small and too well protected for effective orbital bombardment. We estimate that neutralizing all enemy sniper positions would require approximately 14 hours of continuous fire, assuming they do not relocate." 14 hours we do not have," Commander Vex hissed. "Intelligence indicates that rebel reinforcements are en route from the outer rim. If we do not secure the main base within the next 6 hours, this operation becomes significantly more complicated." The command center fell silent, except for the constant chatter of status reports and tactical updates. Everyone knew the math. The ground assault could not proceed while the rebel snipers control the high ground, but eliminating those positions with conventional methods would take too long. Then, a new voice cut through the tactical chatter. It was Admiral Chun, speaking from the human frigate. "Sovereign Justice, this is Admiral Chun. Request permission to deploy our Special Operations asset." Commander Vex looked at the communication station with obvious reluctance. After yesterday's demonstration, no one was dismissing human capabilities as easily as before. But deploying a single soldier against entrenched enemy positions still seemed like a desperate measure. "Admiral Chun, we appreciate the offer, but the situation requires elimination of multiple targets across a wide area. Even with your demonstrated accuracy, a single operative cannot engage targets separated by several kilometers simultaneously." "Understood, Commander. However, I believe you may be underestimating the tactical situation. Request permission to brief you on our operational plan." After a moment's hesitation, Commander Vex activated the secure communication channel. "Go ahead, Admiral. Sergeant Roberts has studied the terrain maps and enemy positions. He believes he can neutralize all 3 primary sniper nests within 30 minutes, provided he can achieve insertion to optimal firing position." The aliens in the command center exchanged glances. General Thonk leaned forward, his crystal armor chiming softly. "Admiral, the sniper positions are separated by distances of 4 to 7 kilometers. How does Sergeant Roberts propose to engage multiple targets across such a wide area?" Admiral Chin's voice remained calm and professional. "Sequential engagement from a single firing position. Roberts has identified a location that provides line of sight to all 3 enemy nests." "That seems unlikely," High Priestess Nalaya said diplomatically. "Our topographical analysis indicates that no single position offers clear sight lines to all 3 target areas. Ma'am, humans sometimes see terrain differently than other species. We'd like permission to try." Commander Vex was quiet for several long moments. The tactical situation was deteriorating, and conventional solutions weren't working. Finally, he spoke. "Very well, Admiral Chun. You have permission to deploy your operative. However, I want constant communication during the operation. If your plan fails, we need to know immediately so we can implement alternative measures. Understood, Commander. Sergeant Roberts is ready to deploy. 20 minutes later, a small human shuttle dropped out of orbit toward the planet's surface. It was a basic transport, nothing fancy, but it was fast and quiet. The pilot was Colonel Martinez, and he flew with the steady confidence of someone who had done this kind of insertion many times before. In the passenger compartment, Sergeant Roberts checked his equipment one final time. His rifle was secured in its case, along with enough ammunition for a sustained engagement. He wore standard human military gear, adapted for the planetary environment, but nothing that would look impressive to alien observers. LZ coming up, Martinez called from the cockpit. You sure about this position? Roberts looked at his topographical map one more time. Yeah, it'll work. The rebels chose good positions, but they were thinking about conventional assault routes. They weren't expecting someone to come from this angle. The shuttle touched down in a narrow valley about 8 kilometers from the main rebel base. The location was hidden from enemy observation by a series of rocky ridges, and the terrain provided a concealed route to Roberts' chosen firing position. I'll be back in 40 minutes, Martinez said as Roberts gathered his gear. Try not to start any interstellar incidents while I'm gone. No promises, Roberts replied with a slight grin. The hike to his firing position took 25 minutes. Roberts moved carefully, using natural cover and staying well away from any routes that might be under enemy observation. The gravity on Kepler 442b was about 10% higher than Earth normal, but that wasn't enough to significantly affect his movement or shooting. When he reached his destination, he understood why the alien tactical analysis had missed this position. It was a narrow ledge on the side of a cliff face, barely wide enough for a single person. From most angles, it looked like just another crack in a rock. But from this specific spot, at this exact elevation, the sight lines were perfect. Roberts set up his rifle and began studying the terrain ahead of him. The first target was the sniper nest on Peak 4, about 1,800 meters away. The second target was on Peak 7, at approximately 2,200 meters. The third was the farthest, on Peak 11, at just over 3,000 meters. He could see all 3 positions clearly through his rifle scope. The rebel snipers had chosen excellent defensive positions, but they had made one critical error. They had positioned themselves to watch for attacks coming up from the valleys below. None of them were expecting incoming fire from a location that was technically behind their lines. Roberts activated his communication system. Sovereign Justice, this is Roberts. In position and ready to engage. Commander Vek's voice came back immediately. Understood, Sergeant. We show friendly ground forces pinned down in Valleys 7 and 12. How long do you need? Give me 2 minutes to range the targets, then watch for results. Roberts began his calculations. Wind speed at this elevation was moderate, coming from the southwest at about 12 kilometers per hour. Temperature was cool, but stable. Humidity was low. All factors that would affect bullet trajectory over the long distances involved. But more than the environmental calculations, Roberts was reading the tactical situation. The 3 enemy snipers were working together, coordinating their fire to keep the alien ground forces pinned down. They had established a rhythm, a pattern of engagement that they probably didn't even realize they were following. Roberts would use that pattern against them. He settled behind his rifle and found the first target in his scope. Peak 4. The rebel sniper was positioned behind a natural rock formation that provided excellent cover from ground-based attacks. But from Roberts' angle, about 40% of the enemy position was exposed. Roberts controlled his breathing and waited. According to the pattern he had observed, this sniper would fire again in approximately 30 seconds. When he did, he would be focused on his target in the valley below, not watching for threats from unexpected directions. 28 seconds later, the rebel sniper fired at something down in the valley. The muzzle flash was clearly visible through Roberts' scope. Roberts squeezed his trigger. The distance was 1,847 meters, according to his rangefinder. Flight time for the bullet was about 2.5 seconds. When it arrived, the rebel sniper was still adjusting his aim for a follow-up shot. Through his scope, Roberts saw the enemy position suddenly go still. Target 1 down, he reported calmly. In the command center of Sovereign Justice, Commander Vex stared at his tactical display. The sniper position on Peak 4 had indeed gone silent, but the speed of the engagement was beyond his experience. Confirmed, Sergeant. Target 1 eliminated. Status on remaining targets? Shifting to Target 2, Roberts replied. The sniper on Peak 7 was more alert. Either he had heard Roberts' shot, or he had noticed that his partner on Peak 4 was no longer responding to communications. Either way, he was moving more cautiously, taking longer between shots. Roberts adjusted his aim and began calculating the new trajectory. Distance, 2,186 meters. Wind conditions were slightly different at this angle, and the elevation change was more significant. But the principles remained the same. This time, he had to wait almost 3 minutes for the target to present itself. When the rebel sniper finally fired at the pinned-down alien forces, Roberts was ready. His second shot crossed over 2 kilometers of mountain air and arrived just as the enemy sniper was beginning to move to a new firing position. Again, the target went still. Target 2 down, Roberts reported. By now, the third rebel sniper knew something was wrong. Roberts could see movement in the position on Peak 11 as the enemy marksman tried to figure out what had happened to his teammates. The rebel was being careful, exposing himself only briefly as he searched for threats. This was going to be the difficult shot. Distance, 3,047 meters. The target was alert and cautious. And Roberts would only get one chance before the enemy either located his position or withdrew entirely. Roberts settled in for a long wait. At this range, patience was everything. He controlled his breathing, steadied his position, and watched the distant target through his scope. For 8 minutes, nothing happened. Then, the rebel sniper made a mistake. Something in the valley below caught his attention. Probably the alien ground forces beginning to advance now that the covering fire had stopped. The enemy marksman moved to get a better angle on a new threat. For just a moment, he was exposed. Robert's third shot was the longest he had ever attempted in combat conditions. The bullet flew for over 4 seconds before reaching its target. At that range, even small environmental factors could throw off the shot by meters. But Roberts had been calculating those factors for 22 years. When the bullet arrived, it found its mark. Target 3 down, he reported. All primary sniper positions neutralized. The communication channel was quiet for a moment. Then, Commander Vex's voice came back, carrying a note of something that might have been awe. Confirmed, Sergeant. All enemy sniper positions are silent. Ground forces report they're no longer taking fire from elevated positions. Roberts began packing his rifle. Happy to help, sir. Let me know if you need anything else. As he made his way back to the extraction point, Roberts could hear the sounds of the assault resuming in the distance. The alien ground forces were finally able to advance up the mountain plateaus, now that the covering sniper fire had been eliminated. 3 shots, 3 targets, 11 minutes total engagement time. In the command center of Sovereign Justice, the alien officers stood in stunned silence as they watched their ground forces advance rapidly toward the rebel stronghold. The main obstacle to the assault had been removed by a single human with a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. General Thonk spoke first, his harmonic voice carrying clear notes of amazement. Commander Vex, I believe we may need to reconsider our understanding of human military capabilities. Commander Vex nodded slowly, his scales shifting to a deep blue that indicated profound thought. Indeed, and I suspect this demonstration was just the beginning. They had no idea how right he was. Word of what happened on Kepler 442b spread through the Galactic Council fleet like wildfire. 3 impossible shots, 3 dead enemy snipers, and a ground assault that had been stalled for hours suddenly, moving forward at full speed. The alien species who had been so dismissive of human capabilities just days earlier were now talking in hushed, respectful tones about the quiet sergeant with the primitive rifle. But the rebels on Kepler 442b weren't finished yet. As the combined council forces pushed up the mountain plateaus toward the main rebel stronghold, they encountered increasingly desperate resistance. The rebels knew they were losing, but they still had one card to play. Hidden deep within the mountain fortress was their most valuable asset, a quantum communications array that allowed them to coordinate with rebel cells across 3 sectors. If that array fell into council hands intact, it would mean the end of the rebellion. But if the rebels could hold out long enough, reinforcements from the outer rim would arrive and turn the tide of battle. The final assault on the main base began at sunset. Kepler 4:42 time. The mountain fortress was carved directly into the rock face, with multiple levels of defensive positions and overlapping fields of fire. The rebels had spent months preparing these defenses, and they had no intention of giving up without a fight. In the command center of Sovereign Justice, the tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. The alien ground forces had successfully taken the lower levels of the fortress, but they were now facing the most heavily defended positions. Every corridor was a potential kill zone. Every room could hide enemy fighters. Status report. Commander Vex ordered. General Thonk consulted his holographic displays, his crystal armor pulsing with colors that indicated frustration. Our forces have secured the first 3 levels of the fortress complex. However, rebel resistance is intensifying. They have established multiple choke points with overlapping defensive positions. Our advance has slowed to approximately 1 room per hour. High Priestess Nalaya glided over to join the conversation, her flowing robes seeming to move independently of any air current. Intelligence reports suggest the quantum communications array is located on the 7th level, deep within the mountain. At current rate of advance, we will not reach the target before rebel reinforcements arrive. Commander Vex's scales darkened with agitation. How long until the rebel fleet arrives? Approximately 4 hours, General Thonk replied. And they're bringing significant firepower, 3 heavy cruisers, and a full complement of fighters. The implication was clear. If the Council forces didn't secure the communications array within the next 4 hours, they would be fighting a much larger battle against fresh enemy reinforcements. The carefully planned operation was in danger of turning into a prolonged siege. Options? Commander Vex asked. We could intensify the orbital bombardment, High Priestess Nalaya suggested. Precision strikes on the upper levels might eliminate some of the defensive positions. Negative, General Thonk's harmonic voice carried clear disagreement. The communications array is our primary objective. If we damage it with orbital strikes, this entire operation becomes pointless. We need to take the upper levels intact. Commander Vex was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical displays. Then, he activated the communication channel to the human frigate. Admiral Chun, this is Commander Vex. We have a situation that may require your special capabilities. Admiral Chin's voice came back immediately. Go ahead, Commander. Our ground assault has stalled in the fortress complex. The rebels have established defensive positions that are proving extremely difficult to eliminate through conventional means. We need to reach the 7th level of the facility within 4 hours, but current progress suggests it will take considerably longer. I see. What kind of defensive positions are we dealing with? General Thonk leaned toward the communication station. Admiral, the rebels have positioned snipers and heavy weapons teams in elevated positions throughout the complex. They're using the fortress architecture to create overlapping fields of fire. Our assault troops cannot advance without taking significant casualties. Understood. Can you give me detailed floor plans of the facility? Transmitting now, Commander Vex replied. On the human frigate, Sergeant Roberts studied the architectural diagrams that appeared on his display screen. The fortress complex was indeed well designed for defense. Multiple levels carved directly into the mountain rock, with narrow corridors that could be easily defended and elevated positions that provided clear sight lines down the main approach routes. But Roberts was looking at the plans from a different perspective than the alien military planners. While they saw defensive positions and choke points, he saw something else entirely. Admiral, he said quietly, I think I might be able to help with this. Admiral Chun looked over his shoulder at the diagrams. What are you thinking, Sergeant? Roberts pointed to a section of the plans showing the fortress's external structure. Look at this. The rebels built their defensive positions to cover the internal corridors and approaches. But they didn't account for external angles. External angles? The fortress is carved into a cliff face, but it's not a smooth surface. There are natural rock formations, ledges, and outcroppings that provide potential firing positions. If I could get to one of these external positions, Admiral Chen studied the diagrams more carefully. You're talking about shooting into the fortress from outside. Yes, ma'am. The rebels have excellent defensive positions for internal threats, but most of them would be exposed to fire coming from external angles. The problem is getting to a position that provides the necessary sightlines. Colonel Martinez, who had been listening to the conversation, leaned over to examine the plans. That's a hell of a climb, Sergeant. Some of those positions are nearly vertical rock faces. Yes, sir. But if I can get there, I should be able to eliminate the defensive positions that are holding up the assault. Admiral Chun was quiet for a moment, considering the proposal. Finally, she activated the communication channel to Sovereign Justice. Commander Vex, this is Admiral Chun. We have a possible solution to your tactical problem. Go ahead, Admiral. Sergeant Roberts believes he can eliminate the rebel defensive positions from external firing positions on the cliff face. However, this would require a very precise insertion and some extremely challenging movement through hostile terrain. Commander Vex's response was immediate. Admiral, the cliff face around the fortress complex is nearly vertical in most areas. How does Sergeant Roberts propose to reach effective firing positions? Sir, Roberts said, speaking directly into the communication system, humans are pretty good at climbing rocks. If you can get me to the base of the cliff, I can work my way up to the positions I need. The communication channel was quiet for several seconds. Finally, General Thonk spoke, his harmonic voice carrying clear notes of disbelief. Sergeant, the cliff face is over 200 meters of nearly vertical rock, even with advanced climbing equipment. Sir, I won't need much equipment, just my rifle and some basic climbing gear. High Priestess Nalaya's melodious voice carried over the channel. Sergeant Roberts, even if you could reach these external positions, how would you coordinate with our ground assault? The timing would need to be extremely precise. Ma'am, once I'm in position, I can eliminate the defensive positions in sequence. Your ground forces can advance as each position goes silent. Should take about 20 minutes total, depending on how many targets we're dealing with. Commander Vex consulted with his tactical officers for several minutes. Finally, he came back on the channel. Very well, Sergeant. You have permission to attempt this operation. However, I want continuous communication throughout the insertion and engagement phases. Understood, sir. 2 hours later, Roberts found himself at the base of a cliff face that looked completely impossible to climb. The rock was dark volcanic stone, nearly vertical, with only occasional ledges and handholds. Most of the alien species would have considered it impassable even with advanced technological assistance. But Roberts had grown up in Montana, where rock climbing was a way of life. He had spent his childhood scrambling up cliff faces that were almost as challenging as this one. The main difference was that this time, he was carrying a rifle and had people shooting at him. The approach to the base of the cliff had been dangerous enough. Roberts had to move through nearly a kilometer of contested ground, staying hidden from rebel observers while carrying his rifle and climbing gear. But Colonel Martinez had provided excellent covering fire from his shuttle, and Roberts had made it to the cliff base without being detected. Now came the really difficult part. Roberts began his ascent slowly and methodically. Each handhold had to be tested carefully, each foothold examined for stability. The volcanic rock was solid, but it could be crumbly in places, and a single mistake would mean a fall of several hundred meters. As he climbed, Roberts studied the fortress structure above him. The rebel defensive positions were visible as dark openings in the rock face, positioned to provide clear fields of fire down into the main approach corridors. But from his current angle, most of those positions would be exposed to external fire. The first 50 meters were the most dangerous. Roberts was climbing directly below some of the rebel positions, and if anyone happened to look out at the right angle, he would be spotted immediately. But the rebels were focused on the main assault, which was still grinding its way slowly through the internal corridors. After an hour of careful climbing, Roberts reached his first firing position. It was a narrow ledge about halfway up the cliff face, barely wide enough for him to set up his rifle. But it provided a perfect angle into the fortress complex. He activated his communication system. Sovereign Justice, this is Roberts. In position and ready to begin engagement. Understood, Sergeant, Commander Vex replied. Ground forces are standing by. Roberts settled behind his rifle and began identifying targets. Through his scope, he could see into the fortress corridors where the rebel defenders were positioned. The first target was a heavy weapons team set up in an elevated position that had been stopping the alien advance for over an hour. Distance, approximately 180 meters. An easy shot under normal circumstances, but the angle was tricky and Roberts was shooting from an unstable position on a narrow ledge. He controlled his breathing, steadied his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The rebel heavy weapons position went silent. Target 1 eliminated, Roberts reported. Ground forces can advance through Corridor 7. Over the next 15 minutes, Roberts systematically eliminated defensive positions throughout the fortress complex. Each shot had to be carefully calculated for the unusual angles and distances involved. Some targets were as close as 150 meters, others were over 400 meters away. But each shot found its mark. Target 8 eliminated, Roberts reported. That should clear the path to level 6. Commander Vex's voice carried a note of amazement. Confirmed, Sergeant. Our ground forces report rapid advance through the upper levels. Resistance has collapsed in most areas. Roger that. I can see the communications array from here. Looks like the rebels are trying to destroy it before your people get there. Can you prevent that? Roberts studied the situation through his rifle scope. Deep inside the fortress complex, he could see rebel technicians working frantically around what looked like a sophisticated piece of equipment. They were placing explosive charges, preparing to destroy the quantum communications array rather than let it fall into Council hands. The target was over 300 meters away, inside the fortress, and partially obscured by various obstacles. It was also a very small target, much smaller than the rebel soldiers Roberts had been engaging. But the quantum communications array represented months of rebel coordination and planning. If it was destroyed, the intelligence value would be lost forever. Roberts made his final calculations. Wind conditions inside the fortress were minimal. Distance was manageable. The angle was difficult, but not impossible. He had one shot before the rebels would complete their sabotage. Roberts squeezed the trigger. 3 seconds later, the lead rebel technician collapsed. The explosive charges scattered as the other rebels dove for cover, abandoning their sabotage attempt. Communications array secured, Roberts reported. Packages intact and ready for recovery. The silence on the communication channel lasted for several long seconds. Finally, Commander Vex spoke, his voice carrying a tone of profound respect. Outstanding work, Sergeant. Ground forces report the fortress is secured and the communications array is intact. Mission accomplished. As Roberts began his descent down the cliff face, he could hear the sounds of the alien assault forces moving through the fortress complex below. The entire operation had taken less than 3 hours from start to finish. When he reached the ground, Colonel Martinez was waiting with the extraction shuttle. Hell of a climb, Martinez said as Roberts gathered his gear. Could have been worse, Roberts replied. At least nobody was shooting at me on the way up. As they lifted off from a surface of Kepler 442b, Roberts looked back at the fortress complex carved into the cliff face. It had been an impressive defensive position, well-designed and expertly defended. But in the end, even the best defensive positions had weaknesses. You just had to know how to find them. And sometimes that meant looking at the problem from a completely different angle than everyone else expected. 6 months after Kepler 442b, everything had changed. The Galactic Council military was no longer the same organization it had been before a quiet human sergeant had demonstrated what primitive Earth technology could accomplish in the right hands. The quantum communications array, captured from the rebel fortress, had provided intelligence that led to the collapse of the entire rebellion within weeks. But, more importantly, it had opened the eyes of the galaxy's military leaders to capabilities they had never imagined. The transformation began with a simple request from Commander Vex. Admiral Chun, he had said during a secure communication just 2 weeks after the operation, the Alterian High Command would like to discuss establishing a training exchange program with human forces. Specifically, we are interested in learning more about your long-range precision shooting techniques. That first request had led to others. The Zephyrians wanted to understand how humans could make accurate calculations without computer assistance. The Korthak were fascinated by the concept of intuitive target acquisition. The Hive Lords, despite their collective consciousness, couldn't understand how a single individual could process so many variables simultaneously. Soon, human military advisors were being requested for operations across Council space. Not just snipers, though they were in highest demand, but specialists in small unit tactics, unconventional warfare, and what the aliens had started calling adaptive combat methodology. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The species that had been dismissed as primitive newcomers were now teaching advanced spacefaring civilizations how to fight more effectively. But the real change came when the hegemony invaded. The first reports arrived during a routine council session on Nexus Prime. Admiral Chun was there as part of the human delegation, along with Sergeant Roberts, who had been reluctantly promoted to Master Sergeant and given the unofficial title of Special Operations Consultant. He still wore the same simple uniform, still carried the same old rifle, and still looked uncomfortable with all the attention. Commander Vex, now bearing the insignia of Supreme Fleet Commander after his promotion following the Kepler 442b success, addressed the emergency assembly with obvious urgency. The hegemony has launched a massive invasion across the Outer Rim, he announced, his scales a dark blue that indicated extreme agitation. 17 systems have already fallen, and their fleet strength appears to be much larger than our intelligence estimates suggested. The chamber erupted in alarmed discussions. The hegemony was the Council's oldest enemy, a confederation of aggressive species that had been expanding into Council space for decades. Previous conflicts had been limited skirmishes, border disputes that were resolved through negotiation or small-scale military action. This was different. This was total war. High Priestess Nalaya's melodious voice carried over the chaos. What are their apparent objectives? Supreme Commander. Complete conquest of Council space. Commander Vex replied grimly. They have deployed approximately 1,200 capital ships across multiple fronts. Their strategy appears to be overwhelming force applied simultaneously to prevent coordinated Council response. General Thonk, also promoted after Kepler 442b and now wearing the crystal insignia of Strategic Forces Commander, leaned forward in his armor. Our combined fleets number approximately 800 capital ships. We are significantly outgunned. Moreover, Commander Vex continued, the hegemony has demonstrated new tactical capabilities. They are using advanced shielding technology that significantly reduces the effectiveness of our conventional weapons. Several of our dreadnoughts have been destroyed by single hegemony vessels. The implications were clear to everyone in the chamber. The Galactic Council was facing an enemy that was larger, better equipped, and technologically superior. Under normal circumstances, this would be a disaster. But these were no longer normal circumstances. Admiral Chen stood up slowly. Supreme Commander, may I ask about the specific tactical challenges our forces are encountering? Commander Vex activated a holographic display showing recent battle footage. The images were devastating. Proud Council warships, some of them centuries old, being systematically destroyed by sleek hegemony vessels that seemed to shrug off return fire. The hegemony ships are using adaptive shielding that learns from our weapon signatures, he explained. Each subsequent hit from the same weapon type does progressively less damage. Additionally, their formations are extremely disciplined. They advance in coordinated groups that provide mutual support and overlapping defensive coverage. General Thonk added his analysis. Our conventional tactics are proving ineffective. Direct assault results in heavy casualties with minimal enemy losses. We have been unable to disrupt their formations or exploit any apparent weaknesses. Admiral Chun studied the tactical displays for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. Supreme Commander, may I suggest a different approach? The chamber fell quiet. After Kepler 442b, everyone listened when humans offered tactical advice. We're open to any suggestions, Admiral. The hegemony's strength appears to be based on overwhelming force and technological superiority. They're fighting the kind of war they expect us to fight. But what if we don't fight that war? Commander Vex's head tilted in the serpentine gesture that indicated confusion. Explain. Human military history includes extensive experience with asymmetric warfare, fighting enemies who are larger, better equipped, and technologically superior. The key is not to engage their strengths, but to exploit their weaknesses. What weaknesses? High Priestess Nalaya asked. Their ships are superior to ours in every measurable category. Admiral Chun looked at Master Sergeant Roberts, who had been sitting quietly throughout the briefing. He gave her a slight nod. Superior ships require superior logistics, she said. Advanced technology requires complex supply chains. Overwhelming force requires massive coordination. All of these create vulnerabilities that can be exploited by smaller, more flexible forces. General Thonk's armor chimed softly. You are suggesting guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale? Not guerrilla warfare, Admiral Chen replied. Precision warfare. Using small units with specific capabilities to achieve strategic effects far out of proportion to their size. She gestured to Roberts. Master Sergeant Roberts has been working with our tactical planning staff on a concept we call strategic precision intervention. The idea is to use small teams of specialists to neutralize key targets that support larger enemy operations. Commander Vex leaned forward. What kind of targets? Robert spoke for the first time during the briefing. His voice was calm and measured, the same tone he had used when discussing shooting fundamentals. Command and control nodes, supply coordination centers, fleet communications hubs, shield generator installations. He paused. Key personnel. The chamber was completely silent now. The implications of what Roberts was suggesting were becoming clear. You're talking about assassination missions, General Thonk said quietly. I'm talking about surgical removal of critical capabilities, Roberts replied. The hegemony's advantage comes from coordination and advanced technology. Remove the coordination, disrupt the technology, and the numerical advantage becomes much less significant. Admiral Chen activated her own tactical display. We've identified 17 high-value targets across hegemony-controlled space. Command ships, logistics hubs, research facilities developing their adaptive shielding technology. Small teams could neutralize these targets while the main hegemony fleet is occupied with conventional operations. Commander Vex studied the proposed target list with obvious fascination. The distances involved, some of these targets are hundreds of light years behind enemy lines. Yes, sir. But small ships can avoid detection much more easily than large fleets. And if the teams are successful, the strategic impact could cripple the hegemony's ability to coordinate their invasion. High Priestess Nalaya's voice carried a note of uncertainty. This strategy would require capabilities that the Council has never developed. Infiltration, precision elimination of targets, operations in hostile territory with no support. Ma'am, Roberts said quietly, those are exactly the capabilities that humans have been developing for the last few thousand years of our history. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Commander Vex spoke. How many human operatives would be required for these missions? For the initial phase, approximately 50 specialists, Admiral Chen replied. Working in teams of 2 or 3, inserted via stealth vessels, with specific objectives for each team. 50 humans against the entire hegemony invasion force. Yes, sir. Commander Vex looked around the chamber at the representatives of species that had been fighting wars in space for millennia. Species with advanced technology, sophisticated weapons, and military traditions stretching back thousands of years. All of them were looking at the quiet human in the simple uniform, waiting to hear what he thought about taking on an enemy that had already conquered 17 star systems. Roberts cleared his throat softly. Supreme Commander, in our experience, it's not about the size of the force you have. It's about applying the right force to the right target at the right time. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the devastating hegemony fleet formations. They're fighting the kind of war they know how to fight. Big ships, overwhelming firepower, technological superiority. But every war has pressure points, places where a small action can have a big effect. And you believe you can find these pressure points? Sir, I believe we can make them. 3 months later, the course of the war had changed completely. The first target had been a hegemony command ship coordinating fleet operations across 2 sectors. Roberts and a single partner, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, had infiltrated the vessel during a routine supply transfer. One precision shot from 800 meters had eliminated the fleet commander during a critical battle briefing. Without coordination, the hegemony fleet formations had broken apart, allowing Council forces to achieve their first major victory. The second mission had targeted a research facility developing improved adaptive shielding. A team of 3 human specialists had eliminated the entire research staff and destroyed 5 years of development work in a single night operation. By the 5th mission, the hegemony was pulling ships back from frontline operations to protect their rear areas. By the 10th mission, their advance had stalled completely as they struggled to maintain coordination and protect their logistics. By the 15th mission, they were retreating. The war that was supposed to end with Council surrender had turned into a rout. Hegemony forces that had seemed invincible were abandoning conquered systems as their command structure collapsed, and their technological advantages evaporated. And it had all been accomplished by 50 humans with rifles and the patience to use them properly. Standing in the same council chamber where they had been mocked 6 months earlier, Master Sergeant Roberts looked out at representatives from dozens of species who now understood exactly what human military capabilities could accomplish. Master Sergeant, Commander Vex said formally, "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to express our profound gratitude for your service and the service of all human forces in this conflict." "Thank you, sir," Roberts replied. "Happy to help." General Thonk stepped forward, his crystal armor gleaming. "Master Sergeant, there is one thing I must ask. How did you know this strategy would work?" Roberts was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain 20,000 years of human military evolution to species that had always relied on technological superiority. "Sir," he said finally, "humans have been fighting wars for a very long time. We've learned that the biggest, strongest force doesn't always win. Sometimes, victory comes down to putting the right person in the right place with the right tool for the job." He gestured to the tactical displays showing the collapsed hegemony invasion. The hegemony had better ships, better weapons, better technology. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed that would be enough. High Priestess Nalaya leaned forward. "What mistake was that?" Roberts smiled slightly, the same quiet expression he had worn when they first questioned his shooting abilities. "They forgot that wars aren't fought by technology. They're fought by people." The chamber was quiet as the assembled representatives considered this simple statement. Around them, the display showed the greatest military victory in Council history, accomplished not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the application of ancient human skills in a modern context. Commander Vex finally broke the silence. "Master Sergeant Roberts, the Council would be honored if you would consider accepting a permanent position as Strategic Operations Advisor." Roberts looked at Admiral Chun, who nodded encouragingly. "Sir," he said, "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'm more useful doing what I do best." "Which is?" Roberts picked up his old rifle case and slung it over his shoulder. "Taking care of problems one shot at a time." As the human delegation left the chamber, the alien representatives sat in contemplative silence. They had learned something important about their newest allies, something that would change how they thought about warfare for generations to come. Sometimes, the most advanced military technology in the galaxy couldn't compete with a well-trained human who knew how to shoot straight. And sometimes one shot really could change everything.